Hi guys, I'm back here again to review Panzer Dragoon Saga, or Panzer Dragoon Azel for the Japanese version. I don't know why they changed the name for the English version, given that Panzer Dragoon Azel makes much more sense with the story, but I digress. I'm going to be very honest with you, I'm doing this review because I love this game. I know many of you haven't played Panzer Dragoon Saga and probably are not going to play it, because Saturn is not the most popular system and this game is rare as hell. Only a small amount of copies were produced outside Japan. If we combine the US and Euro releases, it's something around 20,000 copies only. But before we start this review, I think I need to share with you some of my story with the Sega Saturn. I got the Saturn in the week it was released in my country. I was probably one of the first people to have it here. At that time, I was a big fan of Sega. I had the Sega Tower and I really enjoyed their games. I was very excited to play Virtua Fighter and Daytona USA. Although now I know the sports were not the best, back then I thought they looked amazing and I had a hell of a fun playing them. Then I got the next wave of Sega games such as Sega Rally, Virtua Cop and Virtua Fighter 2, and enjoyed it even more. I really loved my time with Sega Saturn, and to me it's one of the most special video games of all time. I still have it until this day. I know all the flaws of the system, but to me the system and its games were very special. Before the PlayStation 1 hooked me up with Final Fantasy VII and Wild Arms, and then RPG turned into my preferred genre, I enjoyed more playing Sega Saturn than the PlayStation 1. Well, by the end of the generation, the PlayStation 1 turned out to be my preferred video game of all time, which still holds true to this day. But anyway, the Sega Saturn is still a very special system to me. Now going back to the review. The Panzer Dragoon franchise started as a 3D shooter and was launched close to the system release in US. The game was very well received by the public and critics. It had innovative visuals and gameplay and was the first title to really show how the system should be handled to produce great graphics. It used the VDP-1 processor to render the models and VDP-2 to render the amazing backgrounds. The reason? Well, this game was developed by Team Andromeda, one of the most capable Sega's internal studios. Then came the sequel, Panzer Dragoon Saga, which expanded on the first in every possible way. Visuals, sound, gameplay, scale of the scenarios and enemies, everything was improved from the first game. A real classic that should be played by everyone. Looking from the outside, by this point it would be normal to think that the sequel would continue to follow its predecessors. Panzer Dragoon was now a well-known and relatively successful franchise that developers could continue to build on it. But then, in 1998, Panzer Dragoon Saga came and changed everything. This time, Team Andromeda decided to try something completely new, and then turn the game into RPG. And by doing this, they created a masterpiece. To understand why they decided to explore new directions, you need to go back to the 32-bit era. After Final Fantasy VII release, the JRPG genre was in evidence. Squaresoft was the shining star, and many companies tried to follow the same success by investing on existing franchises such as Capcom with Breath of Fire or creating new ones, as Game Arts with Grandia or Sony with ARMS and Legend of Dragoon. Every company wanted to have its Final Fantasy VII killer. It was really an amazing time. With this in mind, after the original Panzer Dragoon release, Yoji Jishi suggested to the Sega's president a RPG game to explore Panzer Dragoon world and lore. Sega's president was excited with the idea to have a competitor to Final Fantasy VII that could help Saturn to beat the PlayStation 1. Then, while part of the Team Andromeda was developing the Panzer Dragoon Saga, the other part started working on this new RPG game. So in reality, both Panzer Dragoon Saga and Panzer Dragoon Saga had the development starting around the same time. The development process turned out to be very challenging, as they had to create the graphic engine and work on full 3D models and scenarios in a way it was never done at that point. These challenges really impacted the release of the game, which happened almost 2 years after the second game. It is really sad that it was released so far in Saturn's life, when Sega was doing a terrible job to promote the system. If you were a RPG fan, it was really disappointing to know that in Japan they were playing amazing games, while Sega in US had completely abandoned the system. I hope that with this reveal I can share with you how amazing this game is, and the more that people know and like this game, maybe in the future we could see a remaster or a follow-up title. Panzer Dragoon Saga starts with a fully animated and voiced GCI that presents you to the main character of the story, Edge. Edge is a mercenary hired by the Empire to guard a mine with ancient artifacts. These artifacts were created by an ancient civilization, which seems to be far more advanced and had control of biotechnology. While Edge is fighting off a monster, he finds a girl buried in a wall, which later you find out her name is Azel. The place is attacked by a group that is after this ancient girl. Everyone gets killed and Edge is shot. He falls deep into the mine, where he finds a huge number of monsters. He tries to attack them, but his gun doesn't work. As he's almost giving up, a dragon appears from the sky and saves him. As usual, I will stop here as I don't want to spoil the story. What I will say though, is that the game has a very solid story and correct pacing. The characters are charismatic and the bond between Edge and Azel is very nicely explored. I also like the fact the game tries to present a more philosophical view on the cliché team hero who saves the world. It is very interesting to understand what happened to that world, who were those ancient people, while at the same time you have to play a role in a war with severe consequences for you and for the world. It is surely a different tone when compared to the RPGs of that era. While most all RPGs relied heavily on dialogue boxes with no voices, Panzer Dragoon Saga had a very innovative and fresh perspective. Many of the dialogues were voiced, although in Japanese, and the game had long and well made, for the time at least, GCI cutscenes fully voiced. Just for comparison, the Final Fantasy series started to have voiced dialogues only on PlayStation 2. I think it was one of the first games to bring the story presentation closer to a movie, something that would be followed by almost every other RPG later on. Visually, Panzer Dragoon Saga was impressive for the time. While the majority of RPG used pre-rendered scenarios with 3D models, or a mix of sprites and polygons, this game had everything built on 3D polygons, from characters to scenarios and environments. You have 3 types of environments: big open areas where you can use the dragon to explore, dungeons that can be explored with the dragon or Edge alone, and villages and cities, where you will talk to people and buy items. Of the 3, the one I like most is the open areas. The feeling of exploring the environments with the dragon was something unique. The dungeons can be visually repetitive at times, and villages are smaller than you would find in other RPGs, but then we have to remember that everything was built in 3D. The only criticism I have is related to the frame rate. Most of the time the game runs okay, but there are some parts, especially when you're walking through a town later in the game, that the frame rate really suffers. Apart from these minor letdowns, Panzer Dragoon Saga was really impressive for the time. To me, in terms of presentation, this game represented to the RPG genre something similar to what Metal Gear Solid represented to the action genre. They both were taking the engines, concepts, designs, and narrative to the second level of the 3D era, completely departing from what was done on the previous generation. However, I can see that, as with many other games of that era, many aspects have not aged well and can look too simplistic nowadays. The soundtrack of Panzer Dragoon Saga, for me, is below expectation. It fills the space during the game, but there is no memorable composition or scene that has its impact amplified by its music. This is a letdown, especially if we compare to its main competitors such as Final Fantasy VII or Grandia. It seems the composers were not able to understand the needs of an epic RPG such as this one. The voice acting, on the other hand, is very good for the time. As I mentioned earlier in the video, many cutscenes and dialogues are voiced acted, although only in Japanese, but it really gives a different perception to the story, as you can see and hear how the characters are reacting to the situations. The gameplay is another point where this game shines. For me, different from what happened to the soundtrack, they completely nailed the translation to the RPG genre and found a great sweet spot between action and turn-based strategy. Starting with the battle system, it is turn-based. You can attack with the dragon using normal attacks or abilities, or with Edge using the laser pistol. Your choice will depend on the enemy types, or if you are facing a single enemy or groups. The power of your dragon will depend on 4 attributes: attack power, defense power, spirit power, and agility power. You can customize these attributes depending on your style of gameplay or to face specific enemies. As you change the stats, the appearance of your dragon will change too, which is very nice. As you level up, your stats will increase and you will obtain new abilities. The battle dynamic is very good. You have to control the dragon and need to move around your enemies to find weak spots. You can freely move during battles, but your action gauge will only recharge when you are stopped. Once it is full, you can start your action. It has 3 levels. Single attacks will consume 1 bar, but abilities can consume more. The enemies are not static, and during the battles they will try to avoid to let you target their weak spot. In the middle of the screen you see a radar. The green spots are the ones you want to move to recharge your bar, as the enemies will not attack you there. The red ones, on the other hand, are the spots where the enemy will attack you if you pass through them, but they are also usually the place where you can reach the enemy's weak spot, so you have to be quick and evaluate your risks. Depending on the enemy, you will not only have to use the correct strategy, but also be quick to position yourself in the correct spot before it moves. All these mechanics really contribute to make the battles more interesting and dynamic. The game also has some memorable boss battles. Some of them are very creative and you will be required to use every mechanic the game has. This is where Panzer Dragoon Saga lets shine its shooter vein, as you will sometimes have to destroy certain structures before being able to damage the boss, or destroy support groups before engage the main boss. The only downside I see is the fact that the battle encounter is mostly random. Looking at the game, I can see why they decided to go this route, given hardware limitations and budget, but it would have been amazing to see the enemies in the screen. The gameplay is mostly divided into open areas where you use the dragon to explore the world, which is my preferred part, and other parts where you explore dungeons. Some dungeons are very well made and have some nice puzzles, while others are just straight tunnels. Now we have to touch some of the negative points of this game. The first one is the fact that the environments feel lonely. The story tries to work around these issues somehow by providing some context, but the reality is that the hardware and technology limitation impacted the design. It was obvious that the 32-bit generation was not able to produce what was envisioned for this game. It is sad to say because I know it's never gonna happen, but it would be amazing to see what this team could achieve if they used today's technology and hardware. Of all the games I've played of that generation, I think this is the game that really deserves a remake with AAA budget. It is easy to see how amazing it could be. And although nowadays the technical limitation of the past is clear, we have to recognize that at that time, this game was pushing the hardware to its limits. The second problem to me is the fact that the game is short and the progression is very linear. It took me around 12 hours to finish the game. Although the main story pacing and closings are great, the world setup and lore are so good that I feel this game could easily have twice the duration. Also, it misses some side quests that could have added to the overall experience. The last point that I want to mention is the way that Edge moves. The animations are very strange and it seems like you are controlling a robot. You get used to it, but I feel this is something that they should have spent more time to make it more natural. In the end, Panzer Dragoon Saga positive points compensate by far any negative points it may have. This is a unique game in terms of design and gameplay, especially considering the year it was released, but this feeling remains true to this day. The combination of movie-like storytelling and innovative and well-designed battle mechanics make this game a true gem. If you are an RPG fan, or Panzer Dragoon fan, or even if you are just looking for a great game, I urge you to play Panzer Dragoon Saga. More people need to know and experience this masterpiece created by Team Andromeda.